Hello once again, this is Tony Liberatore of Millikan University, and we're continuing our lectures on supply and demand. And in this, we're going to be looking at the supply side of the market. In the first lecture, we looked at the buyer side. And in the third lecture, we'll put both of these sides together and see how markets operate. For this particular case, I'll dive a little bit deeper. Well, the market is sending signals to both consumers and producers. On the supplier side, we can see here that the flow out is 1,000 per week, but the flow in is 500, and this is causing some changes in the market. We're likely to see more orders or higher prices, and these signals get transmitted back into the supply chain, where suppliers are witnessing these changes. That is, for example, orders growing or inventories falling and prices are rising, and this spurs reaction by the suppliers. And we're going to look at these reactions by also taking note of the stocks and the flows through the supply chain. So let's just take a peek at that for a moment. Again, we're looking at 500 in and 1,000 out. And let's suppose this grows and is balanced at 750 per week. Well, the situation we're looking at that's responding to the signals in the market and pushing up the rate of flow into the market to 750 is the fact that we have some industry, some set of producers. And since this is a situation where all factors are being held constant other than the price signals in the market, the number of producers, here we have 5, is held constant, and all their conditions are held constant. And when we make this assumption of ceteris paribus, we describe this as the short run. That is, everything is locked in as it is at this particular moment in time. But what the signals do is send instruction to the firms to do more of what they're doing. That is, increase their rate of production. That is, they can work faster, more hours, hire more workers, etc. And to do that, they have to suck in resources. You need more materials, more leather, etc. More people, more hours, more electricity. And so the signals are moving back into the supply chain, and the supply chain is responding, and they have to take resources from other places in the economy, whether they're used or unused, and reallocate them into the production of more shoes. So we have a set of signals that transmit all the way back to the producers and to their suppliers. Now, the producers, obviously, responding to this, could increase their rate of production. They can produce more units with their existing facilities. But they, as well, will probably see that inventories have been drawn down and want to replenish inventories that have been used to fulfill the needs in the market. So I want to make 2 points here, is that in any business there are a set of inventories, and these inventories act as the buffer between the flow out and the flow in, because we can draw out of inventories to meet the flow if we cannot produce things fast enough to meet the flow. So we have a series of production flows and inventories along the way. For example, you drive down the street and you run past a automobile dealership and you see they have cars on the lot. That's their inventory. But every week or month or whatever their arrangements are, they're receiving a flow of cars into that lot. But in the meantime, they're drawing down their inventories. So the supply chain is this complex set of relationships of flows and stocks. So the flow into the market, in this case 750, could be directly from production or can come through inventories that are later going to be replenished by firms. All right, so we have stocks and flows, and in any business situation, firms will have some desired level of inventory, and to get market imbalance, both the desired inventories and the flows have to be right. So anyway, this is what the supply chain has in it that will meet market needs. Let's take a picture of this. Okay, let's look at supplier behavior when we're adjusting price only, ceteris paribus, and we're holding all other factors constant. Some of those factors would be the cost of production, as we've seen with the notion that somebody could increase the tax, or there could be a real quick bump up in wages or other costs. For now, we're going to assume that all those things are held constant and that there's a given number of firms in the industry, so the number of sellers is given, and that there are no natural shocks that would affect the industry. So let's see what happens to this firm as we raise price. And one thing you can think about it, the fact is the firm has certain operating conditions, and there are people back here helping to make decisions about what goes on. Just as buyers are being sensitive to price, all the producers and all the wholesalers and all the retailers are also being sensitive to price and adjusting to their business requirements. Well, here, let's start at the beginning. We have one unit, and it could be a brewer, and we have these amounts of beer, 1 unit of beer flowing into the market per unit of time. Again, it's a rate, so we have to know the per unit of time. So this might be 1 per week, etc. But at a low price, there's some relationship to the cost of production, etc., and the profit of the firm, and they're willing to supply 1 unit per unit of time. As the price rises, there's a tendency for firms to increase their rates of production and their drawdowns of inventory to increase the rate of flow into the market. So here I've shown the simple situation of 5 units flowing in at per unit of time at $10. So there's tends to be a positive relationship between price and the rate of flow into the market. That is, there tends to be a positive relationship between the price and the rate of production and the drawdown of inventories flowing into the market. Now, why would this be the case? Well, it probably just has intuitive appeal to you that this relationship is in place. But one reason could be that in order to fulfill the production of 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, 5 units, additional resources are needed. More resources and material, more labor hours, more electricity, more fuel, etc. And so to get this, you might have to bid it away from other people, and the cost of those things might go up. So you have to cover the cost of what things are worth in the market. It's called opportunity cost. So if you have to bid labor away, you might have to pay a little bit more for it. So there tends to be some opportunity costs to increase production, but there's also the fact that in mass-produced goods and services, that when you increase the number of units you're producing, the average cost goes down. And so there might be a tendency for the firms to earn a greater profit with more units. So we have these two forces. We're going to look at this in more detail in microeconomics. But there tends to be, at some point in the short run, this positive relationship between price and the rate of flow into the market. That is, the rate of production in the firms and the drawdown of inventory. So let's see what happens in our map if we change one of the hidden factors. In this particular case, we're going to increase the cost of production, ceteris paribus. So same number of firms, all other things being equal, other than raising the costs of producing. And so what would that do? Let's look at a simple example of how an increase in cost might affect supply. So let's start here with 3 units being offered at $6. So if this is a week, we produce 3 units a week, 3 units a week, 3 units a week at $6. The rate of flow is $3. Now let's suppose there's a tax imposed on the production of this beer. Suppose the taxing body would like $4 per unit when it's produced. Not when it's sold, but when it's produced. So that we have a new higher cost, $4 more. Well, if you were in the firm and you were looking around, you'd say, God, I'd like to recoup this $4. So if you're going to provide 3 units per week, per unit of time, you no longer are targeting $6. You've got a higher cost structure. Now you're targeting $10. So we essentially wiped out the old firm. We've created new conditions, just as we changed conditions for consumers and created a new consumer. We now have a new set of suppliers in the sense that their conditions have changed. So the cost conditions change, and the old firm behavior here, S1, no longer exists. What we have is a situation where the firms are only willing to produce a lesser amount because of the higher costs. So here, the supply conditions 2 suggests that the industry now is a little more reluctant to supply the existing price structure. That is, there's a decrease in the supply. The supply curve shifts to the left. So less supply, shift left, and then we have a new industry reality. And the old industry has basically been wiped out. So an increase in the cost of production, ceteris paribus, tends to reduce the supply. And that's mapped as a shift to the left in the diagram. But again, the industry is still subject to this tendency that as prices rise, they would tend to offer more units. So the underlying mechanics and accounting and finance and the reality of the firm's behavior in the market remains the same, but supply has decreased. So let's put this back into our traditional two-variable diagram. We have the dependent variable price on the vertical axis, and the display variable, on the vertical axis, and the rate of flow, the rate of production, the rate of quantities, simply shorthand quantities here on the horizontal axis, and the representation of the supplier's behavior curve, this tendency of the rate of flow into the market to increase with the price, depicted here. So let's vary price, ceteris paribus, holding all other factors constant. So as prices rise, our map of producer behavior, a producer response curve here, you can see, suggests that as prices are rising, firms are willing to increase their rate of production or their rate of flow into the market. And the term quantity in economics summarizes that rate of flow. And so we say this is an increase in quantity supplied, quantity being the rate of flow into the market by suppliers. So here we have an increase in quantity supplied. And this happens with all producers. Now the supply curves can have a lot of shapes. We just have one upward sloping, and we look at more detail in microeconomics. We look at other conditions. But it could be flat or steep or curved, many different situations. But at some point, the supply curves in the economy do tend to have a positive slope. This situation shows us that at a price P1, for example, and a quantity of Q1, quantity of Q2, P1, Q2, that the rate of flow into the market is relatively low. Rate of flow being Q2. At a higher price, due to the incentives to the industry, resources are sucked in, and the industry increases its rate of production and the rate of flow into the market, and we call that the increasing the quantity being supplied. For a change in a non-display variable, that is one of the hidden factors or one of the ceteris paribus factors, we can look at, again, this increase in the cost of production, or a decrease in the cost of production, as I'm showing right here. That is, if the cost of production decline, the firms are willing to offer more, and the supply curve shifts to the right. More Q is to the right, so the supply curve shifts to the right. We would describe this as an increase in supply. Of course, under those conditions, the original conditions or the original firms don't exist in their old conditions. And we really only have one curve, as we normally said, but we keep them around so we can tell what's happening along the stages of activity here. An increase in the cost of production would mean a shift to the left in the supply curve, that is less supply moving left, and we describe that as a decrease in supply. So now we can describe both the influence of price, ceteris paribus, of any change in circumstances. So just to summarize that behavior in the map of supplier behavior, let's look at prices in the production process, ceteris paribus. Again, it's the short run. The number of firms is held constant. We've got a display variable of dollars on the vertical axis and display variable Q, that is the rate of quantity flowing in and out the markets, on the horizontal axis. Prices rise, quantity supplied increases. This is a movement along the curve showing that firms are increasing their rate of production or drawing down their inventories, and this is flowing into the market. However, if there is a change in the hidden factors, the given conditions, then we would reposition our description of the industry in this map. Again, using costs, we can see here the industry is supplying S1 behavior under current conditions, but if we lower the costs, we will have more supply. That is a movement to the right in the supply curve, an increase in supply. If costs increase, we'd have a shift to the left. Now here, these are changes in the cost structure. For example, an increase in the tax, or a renegotiation with labor unions for higher wages, or a bump up in petroleum prices, or a bump up in utility prices. Under ceteris paribus, all those things are held constant, but now we are changing some of those things. So we can display both the price response and the hidden factor response on the supply side of the market. And we have the language straight. Any change with price is a reflection of quantity. And here, when we're talking about change in circumstances, we have an increase or a decrease in supply. So let's look at a couple cases here. I think you can fill it in. Up at the top left, we have prices of gasoline. So if the price of gasoline rises, because you already had the intuition of how you would behave, but what's the intuition you have for suppliers? Well, that's probably fairly clouded by your opinion of oil companies or big business or the things that you've been sensitive to. But now I have a map that represents how firms behave. Here we see that the supply curve is upward sloping to the right. As the price of gasoline rises, firms tend to increase their rate of flow into the market. And so for gasoline, this could be a drawdown of existing inventories because we have a higher price. It could also be an increase in their rate of refining, that is working more hours, etc. So we could have a response to this price all through the supply chain. But to do this, you have to suck resources into the industry. That is one thing that the higher price does, is it's directing how resources are flowing into the supply chain. And this is an important thing because this is really how resources move around in the economy. They are price driven. So this is our typical situation. The rate of flow into the market will increase as prices rise. Okay, so we have below that the price of dumb phones falls. Well, the opposite of smartphones. And we're not looking at why this happens. I'm just giving this to you as a fact. So in this particular case, as prices fall, incentives are sent back and signals are sent back to the firm that, hey, we might not be able to offer as many phones because of the cost right? Or the lack of profitability at P2. And so what happens is the quantity, that is the rate of flow into the market, tends to shrink. That is, we tend to move from Q1 to Q2. And this particular case, as we cut back to the market, would reduce our rate of production, and we'd probably let some inventories roll off, so our inventories might be smaller. But we're going to do all we can to absorb the shock through our inventory and production adjustments. So the rate of flow shrinks as the price falls. And in this particular case, instead of attracting resources, the resources are being pushed out. The signals are saying, hey, we don't need as many resources in this industry anymore. Maybe you should use them somewhere else. Now, these are really difficult things to really grasp, but when Detroit started to feel the brunt of foreign competition, it started to shrink. That is, it didn't need as many resources, and so engineers had to relocate, producers had to shrink, suppliers had to shrink. That is, resources were what we say is being released from that industry and hopefully employed in other places. Right? And on the supply side here, we can see this key link to the movement of resources. All right, so we looked at smartphones before, but on the demand side, let's look at it supply side. Let's take the situation of profits increasing. That is, it's a fundamental change for some reason in the conditions of the industry. Now, when we looked at price only here on the left-hand side, everything else was held constant. We didn't talk about a fundamental change in the cost structure for higher taxes or a change in profit. But let's look at what happens when the profit in the industry is higher. Well, the existing industry, S1, conditions are different. But with higher profits, more firms would tend to pop up. That is, we're not in the short run, we'd be in the long run. In the short run, the number of firms is given. But now we're looking at the situation where we have more profit. And so firms tend to start to get bigger, and new firms start to enter. Now you can see this in, for example, the smartphone business, right? Once there was Apple, and now there's everyone. Right? BlackBerry, Apple, now Samsung is big in it. Other companies are in it. They're using the Android operating system. But entrepreneurs will move in, companies will move in and increase the number of firms in response to the higher profit because people want a piece of the profit. So an increase in profit would increase the number of firms. It would change the conditions in the industry. So we would have more firms or more supply, and that is, we would move to the right. And this would be an increase in the supply of smartphones. You increase the supply, and under other circumstances, this would tend to also increase the rate that's flowing into the market. In the beef market, mad cow disease, we have the opposite situation where the supply curve is shifting to the left, and that's a decrease in supply. So just think about that for a minute. You could fill that in with your own thinking about this, why this must happen. So work backwards here a little bit. Mad cow's disease, of course, means that the beef has to be destroyed. And we need to destroy the beef. That's essentially saying that you're reducing the number of beef suppliers, that the industry is shrinking. You've destroyed the animals. Fewer cows in the herd, fewer animals, means that production is destroyed. That is, less supply, and the supply shifts to the left. That's a decrease in supply. Of course, mad cow disease would affect both sides of the market because consumers might feel that the meat is no longer safe. So both sides will be affected, and we'll look at that and how that might happen. But in this particular case, the destruction of the cows is reducing the herds, and I'm focusing on the supply side. So we have a decrease in the supply. So here we can see the movement on the supply side, an understanding of stocks and flows in the supply chain, and the movement of resources in the economy. So you should be able to handle the movements from price and the movements from changes in the underlying conditions, the ceteris paribus factors. Okay, well, we've done the buyer side of the market and now the supply chain and the seller side of the market. In our next lecture, we're going to go to look at how the interactions of buyers and sellers generate patterns in the markets and how markets behave. See you at the next lecture. Thanks.